Have you ever felt like a deposed king in your own kingdom? Imagine for a moment that you are standing before a monumental task. Perhaps it is a business proposal that could redefine your career, a new language that would open a world of culture, or simply the brutal, necessary ritual of the gym. Your rational self, that sophisticated I you are so proud of, is screaming at you to act. It tells you that this is your future, your health, and your legacy. But at a deeper, more visceral level, an ancient entity within your brain quietly pulls the plug on the entire system. You end up spending the afternoon slumped on the sofa, paralyzed in a gray trance, scrolling through hundreds of mindless videos of strangers on the other side of the globe while a sense of guilt as corrosive as acid eats away at your self-respect. The world looks at you and calls it laziness. The motivational gurus on your feed shout that you lack willpower, or that you are simply making excuses. But as a neuroscientist who has spent decades studying the intricate dance of neurotransmitters, I am here to tell you that they are fundamentally wrong. What you call laziness is actually a homicide of the will orchestrated by a brutally conservative accountant sitting right between your cerebral hemispheres. Your brain was not evolved to make you successful, wealthy, or fit. It was evolved to help you conserve energy until you die. Right now, your brain is running an algorithm I call neuro-economics, constantly weighing the cost of effort against the profit of dopamine. Tragically, in a modern world engineered to weaponize instant gratification, that scale has been shattered. You aren't lazy? You are Stone Age hardware trapped in a high-speed digital casino. But here's the fascinating part that will haunt you. The very mechanism making you useless today is actually the most powerful tool to make you addicted to discipline. What if I told you that you could make solving a complex problem feel as intoxicating as winning the lottery? The secret lies in a system reset that most people are too afraid to perform because they don't understand the biological reality of what is happening inside their skull. To see this crime scene in action, we must look at our primary subject, Mark. At 28 years old, Mark is a typical office professional in the relentless grind of New York City. He is a hard worker by nature, yet he finds himself trapped in the gray zone of depletion. He thinks he is losing his character, but in reality, his prefrontal cortex, the CEO of his brain, has been kidnapped by a storm of cheap dopamine. Mark is not alone. He is the avatar for an entire generation whose motivation engines have been hijacked. To understand why you choose the scroll over the soul work, you must realize that your brain does not care about your 10-year vision or your desire to be a high performer. It is a stingy accountant living in the eternal present. And this accountant asks one question for every action you consider. What is the return on energy investment? Our nervous system was designed over millions of years of evolution to save energy at all costs. In the wild, wasted effort meant death. If your ancestors chased a gazelle without a high probability of catching it, they wasted precious calories and starved. Thus, the brain built a filter where high effort plus uncertain reward equals an immediate shutdown of the system. Look at Mark in his Manhattan office, surrounded by the rhythmic drumbeat of mouse clicks and the crushing pressure of a 50-page financial report. When Mark looks at that stack of work, his brain runs the numbers. The effort is extreme, requiring intense focus from the prefrontal cortex, which is the most energy-hungry part of the human body. The reward, however, is vague and distant, perhaps a nod from a boss next month or a bonus in December. The accountant's verdict is clear. The ROI is too low, so it sends a signal of boredom and fatigue to force Mark to stop. But then Mark picks up his phone. The effort here is near zero, requiring only the flick of a thumb. The reward is an immediate spike of novelty, bright colors, and social validation. The accountant's verdict flips instantly to a green light because the ROI appears infinite. Your brain isn't broken. It is simply being navigated by an ancient compass in a world full of magnetic interference. Every app, every snack, and every notification has been engineered by teams of scientists to trick this internal accountant into believing that these trivialities are the most valuable resources on Earth. To truly rewire this system, we have to understand the chemical fuel driving this entire process, which is dopamine. Most people call dopamine the pleasure chemical, but that is a catastrophic anatomical error. If dopamine were pleasure, Shabbat, you would feel incredibly happy after scrolling for 3 hours. Instead, you feel empty. In the language of neuroscience, dopamine is the chemical of wanting, not liking. It flows through a cluster of neurons called the nucleus accumbens, which acts as the motivation engine of your brain. Dopamine spikes the highest when you anticipate a reward, not when you actually receive it. It is the itch, not the scratch. When Mark sees that red notification bubble, his brain isn't feeling joy. It is feeling an urge to act. It whispers that something life-changing might be behind that click. Mark doesn't scroll because he enjoys it. He scrolls because his brain is trapped in a chemical thirst he cannot quench. And here is where the story gets dark. A process called downregulation. When you flood your system with cheap, high-intensity dopamine, so your brain performs a biological defense maneuver. Imagine your dopamine system is a speaker. If you blast heavy metal at volume 100 constantly, your brain will automatically put on noise-canceling headphones to prevent the synapses from burning out. It physically reduces the number of dopamine receptors available to receive the signal. The result is that you become dopamine deaf. A book that once captivated you now feels like gray, lifeless ink because its volume is only a 10. A project that once made you proud now feels like a prison sentence because your brain can no longer hear the quiet music of long-term achievement. Mark hasn't become incompetent. He has developed a tolerance, exactly like a hard drug addict. He needs louder, more toxic stimuli just to feel normal. But the beauty of neuroplasticity is that what has been broken can be rebuilt. Your brain is constantly rewiring itself based on your choices. Every time you choose a high-effort task over a low-effort distraction, you're casting a vote for a different neural architecture. This brings us to the concept of the dopamine detox. Despite the name, you are not actually removing dopamine from your body. You are removing the artificial, hyper-stimulating sources that have caused your receptors to hide. Think of it as a factory reset for your motivation. A dopamine detox is about turning down the dial on the world's noise so your brain can recalibrate what a normal level of satisfaction feels like. When you remove the overwhelming sources of easy pleasure, something remarkable begins to happen. Your dopamine receptors begin to upregulate. They become more sensitive. Suddenly, activities that seemed boring before start feeling engaging again. The satisfaction of completing a task, the energy after a workout, and the calm after focused work begin to register on your internal scale. You are not becoming someone new. You are returning to your biological baseline. You are remembering what it feels like to be driven by internal satisfaction rather than external manipulation. Most people fail at this process because they approach it with the wrong mental map. They try to white-knuckle their way through it, relying on willpower alone. But willpower is a finite resource, a thin layer of gold over a mountain of leaden impulses. It is no match for a dopamine-starved brain screaming for stimulation. To succeed, you must understand the transition period. For the first few days of a detox, you are going to feel restless, irritable, and perhaps even anxious. This is not a sign of weakness. It is the physical sensation of withdrawal. Your brain has adapted to a certain level of artificial heat, and now that you have stepped into the cold, it is panicking. The discomfort you feel is the sound of your brain reorganizing itself. Most people give up right before the breakthrough because they interpret this restlessness as a sign that they are doing something wrong. But as a scientist, I tell you that this restlessness is the most beautiful sound in the world. It is the sound of your receptors coming back online. Practically, this means you must identify your highest dopamine activities, not the ones you love most, but the ones that require the least effort for the most stimulation. For Mark, and for most of us, this is the smartphone. Specifically, it is the short-form video content and social media feeds that offer infinite novelty, but it could also be junk food, online shopping, or any activity that provides intense pleasure with minimal investment. You must eliminate these sources temporarily to allow the reset to happen. A 3-day detox is the bare minimum, 7 days is better, and 14 days is truly transformative. During this period, you are creating artificial scarcity. By making easy dopamine unavailable, you force your brain to find satisfaction in harder activities. However, you cannot simply remove these habits. You must replace them because nature and the human brain both abhor a vacuum. If you take away the phone, you must replace it with activities that provide slower, more sustainable rewards. This is where Mark must change his environment. He begins to read physical books because they require sustained attention. He cooks his own meals because the process of preparation provides a slow build-up to the reward of eating. He goes for walks in the park without headphones, forcing his brain to process the subtle inputs of the environment instead of being spoon-fed a podcast. At first, these activities feel painfully slow. Mark feels like he is watching paint dry, but as he persists, the magic of upregulation kicks in. His brain begins to release dopamine in anticipation of these slower activities as well. After a week of reading, his brain learns that opening a book leads to the deep satisfaction of learning. After a week of workouts, his brain starts craving the endorphin rush and the sense of accomplishment that comes with physical exertion. He is literally retraining his reward system to prefer satisfaction over pleasure. There is a crucial distinction here that we must address: the difference between pleasure and satisfaction. Pleasure is immediate and fleeting. It comes from external stimulation and requires no effort. Satisfaction is delayed and lasting. It comes from internal accomplishment and requires significant effort. Modern life bombards us with pleasure but leaves us entirely empty of satisfaction. This is why you can spend an entire day being entertained and still go to bed feeling unfulfilled and guilty. Your brain received the pleasure, but it missed the satisfaction. A dopamine detox shifts your focus back to building that satisfaction. And here's the secret that the multi-billion-dollar entertainment industry doesn't want you to know. Satisfaction actually produces more dopamine over time than pleasure does. When you accomplish something difficult, your brain releases a sophisticated cocktail of neurochemicals, including dopamine for motivation, serotonin for pride, and endorphins for well-being. This is the feeling of being truly alive. Neuroscience backs this up. Studies show that delayed gratification activates the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for planning, decision-making, and self-control. The more you practice delaying your rewards, the stronger these neural pathways become. Conversely, instant gratification activates the more primitive parts of your brain, the limbic system, which operates on impulse and emotion. Every time you choose discipline over distraction, you are quite literally strengthening the advanced parts of your brain and weakening the primitive ones. You are upgrading your mental hardware. Over time, this changes your default setting. Discipline stops feeling like a battle against yourself and starts feeling like your natural state. This is what it means when people say discipline has become a habit. It isn't that the work became easier, it's that your brain rewired itself to prefer the challenge. Let me tell you what happens after a proper detox. You will notice your attention span expanding like a lung taking its first full breath of air. Things that used to bore you within minutes will hold your focus for hours. You will feel a clarity of thought that has been missing for years. Your ideas will come more easily because your mental bandwidth is no longer being consumed by the constant search for the next hit. You will make decisions faster because you are no longer seeking validation through a screen. Most surprisingly, you will start feeling genuine excitement about things that used to feel like chores. That project you've been avoiding, you'll actually want to work on it. That gym session, you'll look forward to the sweat. This isn't fake motivation, it is your brain functioning the way it was designed to function before it got hijacked. However, I must be honest with you, this is not a one-time fix. Your brain will always try to drift back toward easy rewards because that is its evolutionary nature. The key is to build systems that make discipline the path of least resistance. This is where environment design becomes your greatest weapon. If Mark keeps his phone next to his bed, he will check it first thing in the morning. If he keeps healthy food visible and prepared, he will eat it. You cannot rely on willpower when your environment is actively sabotaging you. Design your life so that the dopamine-rich activities require significant effort to access, and the satisfaction-rich activities are effortless to start. Delete the apps. Use website blockers. Put your phone in another room when you work. Make junk food inconvenient and healthy food convenient. Every barrier you put between yourself and a distraction is a vote for the person you're trying to become. There is also a social component to this that we often overlook. The people around you are constantly influencing your dopamine baseline. If everyone in your life is scrolling, binging, and seeking instant gratification, you will be pulled in that direction through your mirror neurons, cells that prime us to mimic the behavior of others. But if you surround yourself with people who value focus and deep work, their habits become contagious. This doesn't mean abandoning your friends, but it does mean being intentional about who you spend your time with and what you do together. Your brain is shaped not just by your actions, but by the community you inhabit. Some of you might be thinking that this sounds miserable, that making life harder is the last thing you want to do. But that is the trap of the hijacked brain. From your current state, discipline seems harder than distraction. But from the perspective of a recalibrated brain, distraction feels harder than discipline because distraction leaves you feeling empty, anxious, and behind. Discipline leaves you feeling accomplished, confident, and in control. Which is actually harder? Spending your days chasing dopamine hits that never satisfy you, or building a life where effort itself becomes the reward. The path of least resistance in the short term is almost always the path of most resistance in the long term. This is about reclaiming agency over your own mind. Right now, if you are honest, you are not really in control. Your phone controls when you feel bored. Algorithms control what you think about. Apps control how you spend your time. That is not freedom. That is a high-tech form of servitude. True freedom is having a brain that works for you, not against you. It is being able to choose difficult things and actually enjoy the process of doing them. It is waking up excited about your work instead of dreading it. It is going to bed satisfied instead of guilty. That is what is on the other side of this process. It isn't about perfection, it is about alignment, your actions finally matching your intentions. The rewiring process never truly ends because you are always either reinforcing discipline or reinforcing distraction. Every moment is a choice. But after you've reset your dopamine system, the choices become infinitely easier. The pull toward distraction weakens as the pull toward meaningful work strengthens. You develop what we call intrinsic motivation. You do things because they are satisfying in themselves, not because you are chasing an external carrot. This is the highest form of discipline. It is not forced, it is not white-knuckled, it is natural, it is who you are. So here's what I want you to do. Do not just watch this video and move on to the next one. That would be the old version of you, the one seeking another hit of information without action. Instead, make one concrete decision right now. What is the single highest source of empty dopamine in your life? Identify it. Then, commit to removing it for the next 7 days. Not forever, just 7 days. Notice what happens. Notice the restlessness. Notice when it peaks and when it starts to fade. Notice what fills the space. Notice how your relationship with effort begins to shift. Document the process, because once you see it happening in real time, once you feel your brain physically rewiring itself, you will never want to go back to being a ghost in your own life. You are not meant to live as a slave to algorithms and impulses. You are meant to be someone who does hard things and loves doing them. That version of you is waiting. And the path to becoming them starts with a single choice to let your brain breathe, to step away from the noise, and to trust that on the other side of temporary discomfort is a permanent transformation. Your brain is ready to be rewired. The only question is, are you ready to do the work? If you want to continue this neurological surgery in your own life, to understand the dark, fascinating mechanics of why we do what we do, and to gain the tools to stay in the driver's seat of your own mind, then join this laboratory of high performers. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. By doing so, you are telling the algorithms that you value deep insight over empty distraction. You're choosing to upgrade your mental hardware rather than letting it rot.